If you're an American living in Europe or wanting to move here, this week is a harsh reminder that the rules of the game can shift fast. This video isn't really about politics. Think of it more like expat risk management. This isn't panic, it's just basic preparedness. There are 5 high-level watch areas that I'm going to be paying extra close attention to over the next weeks and months, and I'll talk about that here today a bit. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and keep it as apolitical as you can, or, at least be nice while making your political opinion. And one super quick personal note before we get started. I had planned to shoot this whole video out and about in the documentary style that people seem to like, but life keeps throwing us curveballs with illnesses with the baby. So we got her healed up from hand, foot, mouth disease. A lot of people ask from the last video. Thanks. She's fine from that now. But there is a wave of gastro tearing through the daycare. And it hit her last night at home, and I'll spare you the details, but it's pretty difficult. Susie was up most of the night dealing with it. And we're not at daycare, which means I don't have time to go shoot this video out and about. So I'll be shooting the rest of this from the desk on Saturday when Susie can watch Jenny. But right now, she does feel well enough to go ride her little scooter. Yeah. Say hi to the people. See, you look a lot better. See? She looks like a little cutie pootie. Yay, Jenny. Woo! All right. This is called Ways to Have Fun when it's raining outside and your living room looks like a children's gymnasium. So as promised, greetings from Saturday. I'm here at the desk, and the illness has hit me as of last night, so I am not feeling 100%. I may be feeling 50%, but I really want to get this video out to you, and I am going to be basically talking off of my notes so that I can keep it tight and concise, because the issues at play are something that really affect so many of us, and they're things to consider. Geopolitics, when people hear that term, they think probably of like tanks and war. But what actually shows up first for people like us is friction. So systems slow down, assumptions of what normal is break, and uncertainty leaks into your everyday life. What specifically triggered me to make this video are the recent events with the US and the EU. And I won't get into details, and the details on the ground will have changed by the time you see this video. This is a very evolving situation. But for people who don't follow the news quite as closely as I do, because I'm fairly obsessive about it, there have been statements made by the current US administration around NATO and tariffs and alliance commitments. And that has gotten very public pushback from many European leaders, not just on social media, but at serious places on the world stage in front of all the cameras at Davos this last week. And European officials are now openly talking about de-risking from the US, both economically and strategically. And there are even some diplomatic situations where the EU is not even at the table that the US is involved in, where typically the EU would be at the table. So it's not the state of affairs that it has been of late up until now. Maybe the most telling symbol about this is that markets have reacted. So currency markets, bonds, gold, those markets have all priced in this risk. So that's how you know this isn't just noise. The people who work in the markets are reacting, not from a cultural war sort of an angle. That is literally putting, calculating and putting a price of risk onto their different area that they focus on. Now, before I launch into the rest of my talking points here, a few things for a sanity reset. So, war is not imminent, I don't think. NATO hasn't collapsed as of now. France isn't about to start kicking Americans out for no good reason. And really nobody should be, panic packing. But this is a reminder, and why I want to make this video is it's a reminder that if your life spans borders like ours does, whether it's visas, money, healthcare, income, you are more exposed to geopolitical friction than someone who just lives entirely inside one system. So today I'm going to share how I'm thinking about all of this and how I would suggest that other expats think about it too. I'm watching 5 different systems, and for each one, I'm not asking, will everything collapse? Because I think that's unlikely. But I am asking, what is the best case, the base case most likely, and then the worst case scenario for each of these systems that we're looking at over the next, say, 6 to 12 months. So the first pillar I'm going to look at has to do with residency and immigration status. And what this pillar is, plainly put, is your legal right to be someplace, in this case, here in France. So in the best case, nothing changes, and French immigration continues working exactly as it does now, slow and bureaucratic and procedural, but it does work eventually. And U.S. politics, in the best case, would remain irrelevant to your status as specifically an American who wants to live or does live in France. But let's look at the base case, which is probably the most likely outcome, which is that in the near to medium term, you have more documentation requirements, you have more scrutiny of your documents, you will probably face longer processing times, and not hostility exactly, but perhaps expect a tightening of the systems that are under uncertainty because of everything that's going on in the world right now. But then, of course, there's the worst case. And from my point of view, at least, and I think probably shared by other people who follow this stuff pretty closely, the worst case means that diplomatic strain leads to a much stricter enforcement of existing rules. Probably not new laws, although that's not off the table, but especially that means that sort of gray area living becomes riskier. I can't possibly get into every hypothetical scenario, but let's say you're here on a visitor visa, but you're actually doing remote work, which is not kosher on a visitor visa, etc. You need to make sure that you're really compliant with the rules around your specific visa and residency type. In terms of who it affects, basically people who don't have clean paperwork are the ones it's going to affect first. If your situation is muddy or murky, you will probably start to have some issues in a worst case scenario. But let me give you a reality check. France does not revoke residency because of American politics. So the practical takeaways are: be boringly thorough and legal with all of your preparation and all of your documents and maintaining all of your records. Keep your dossier ready and up to date in case you need to go and present yourself to a given authority to validate or justify something. And if you have any kind of, whether it's your residency renewal, visa renewal, or something else related to your status to be here, if you have a renewal on the horizon, start that process as soon as you are able to. There's some things that you can't do too far in advance. There's basically, there's absolutely a hard deadline to be complete, but then there's also you cannot start something earlier than a certain time. So that depends on numerous factors, but whatever situation you're in, be sure to stay on top of that. Pillar 2 has to do with money, banking, and financial flows internationally. So what this pillar is quite simply how money moves or doesn't across borders. The best case is that transfers still work like normal. The foreign exchange rate fluctuates, but it's within range that we have been expecting, and that you have some kind of mild annoyance in your life because it gets a little harder to budget things. If you're moving money, if your life and income requires being able to balance things that move across borders, it could get just a little trickier, but I think that's the best case. The base case, which is probably the most likely, is that you have more compliance checks, meaning, are you doing this the right way? Is this legal? Is this kosher, what you're trying to do? So expect, slower international wires, more please explain this transfer emails from your bank on either side, and volatility in currency, as I was saying a moment ago, could really affect your budget more dramatically. So if you get paid in one country, but you live in this country and you're used to budgeting a certain way, you may have to rethink how you do that. In the absolute worst case outcome, delays go from days to weeks to do certain things. Some U.S. banking tools could become less reliable abroad or even not available, and redundancy matters. Make sure that you have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's on anything that you're doing. So the key here is that money doesn't stop moving. It just gets slower and more annoying to do so. A few practical takeaways about this pillar are: you should have multiple accounts if possible, especially including a local account that is solid and safe and available to you to take care of your local bills when you need it. You want to have backup payment methods for anything important. So have more than one way to pay for certain things. and never rely on last-minute international wire transfers to pay some critical bill. And I won't get into the details because that's our business, but we've had several issues where a wire was held up on one of the other end, either from China or from the U.S., or there was compliance checks here at the French bank to explain some things and provide documentation. That already exists, and we're doing things like super boringly by the book. So if things start to get a little crazier, just expect more of that. That becomes probably the normal instead of it usually works without a problem, and one time out of 10 you have to deal with something beyond that. It could become more of your normal reality to have to really prove yourself and what you're doing, and that it's legal. Pillar 3 that I'm looking at has to do with healthcare and social systems. What this pillar is, in so many words, is your safety net when things go sideways, insurance and such. So the best case is that French healthcare continues working exactly as it does. It's slow, but it's dependable. The base case, as I see it for this pillar, is that you can probably expect a longer time for reimbursement on certain things, and to have to file even more paperwork and appeals taking even more time. We're in the middle of a situation right now. We'll do a video about it whenever it resolves one way or the other, but we've gone through a multi-stage appeal process to try to get something covered that was supposed to be covered. And one of our earliest videos on this channel, we kind of mention it in passing, and it's still unresolved. And we've done videos talking about getting together with the Maison du Justice et du Droit, the public aid lawyers, basically, who specifically help you with dealing with systems like this. I don't have an update yet. I'm sitting here, it's late January of 2026, and I'm still waiting on resolution for something that we've been chasing for 7-8 months now. The worst case is that budget pressure shows up as administrative drag. Probably not a loss of care, but essentially the base case that I am kind of expecting, it's that, but worse. And if you dealt with this stuff, you already realize that when it doesn't work, it's very frustrating. It normally does work, just slowly, but when things don't work, it is a black box to try to figure out what you have to do next. But I think it is important to remember that in France, residency matters more than your nationality. If you are a legal French resident, you are considered to be under the umbrella of protection for the different French systems. So that is a bit reassuring. The key for me is that the system is frustrating, but it's also shockingly resilient. And the practical takeaways I would give you are to keep every single document related to healthcare issues or expenses, and expect bureaucracy, but not necessarily full-blown collapse, hopefully. So pillar 4 is about work, income, and remote life. So what this pillar is basically how you pay rent and groceries, as well as deal with your business life, especially if that business crosses international borders. So in the best case, say you do remote work, best case that remains uninterrupted, and your clients adjust to issues that you face having to do with potentially, delays in wire transfers and things like that, but hopefully your clients can adjust and you can adjust, and, but your business doesn't disappear. So in the base case, I think you could expect economic uncertainty to slow decision making before people, ink a contract. Contracts could get delayed because you need to have a certain amount of certainty about how things are going to work to be able to do cross-border business. And tax and compliance questions will matter even more than they do, which is a huge amount already. But in the worst case, cross-border income could become very difficult to deal with in terms of taxes and wiring and dealing with contracts. So, employer-dependent expats might especially feel this first. If you have a foreign employer, but you live here and you work legally for a foreign company, but you work within France, there could be issues related to that. I think the key for me is that the more portable your income is, the less panic you need. So the key takeaways for me would be to diversify your income streams, if at all possible. Maybe start a YouTube channel, although this doesn't pay us anything yet, but maybe one day, theoretically, this will be a little stream of income for us. You should build your local footing out as thoroughly as possible. If you live here to live here, you should really become as integrated as you can and have French banks and French systems and French clients, depending on what you do for a living. And you should not assume assume that any arrangements or agreements from yesterday are going to be permanent, because things are always changing. And the fifth pillar that I'm looking at especially has to do with daily life, your safety, and the social climate. So what this pillar is your actual lived experience of living here. In the best case, nothing changes. Daily life is usually lived pretty much below the headlines that get our attention. So the base case that I expect is, potentially having a few more awkward conversations with people and definitely seeing stronger opinions online about political issues. But, normal life is offline, and I think that's probably remains relatively the same and unchanged for most people, hopefully. But in the worst case, I think you can look forward to sharper rhetoric, even among friends, and probably not commonplace everyday hostility toward Americans, but most likely hearing about isolated instances of people having issues out in public. But again, the key for me is remembering that most of daily life does happen below the level of headlines. So the practical takeaways are to stay local and stay human, and don't import internet anxiety into your real life. So that's what I'm going to be looking at for myself and Susie and Geneva. I'm not telling anyone to move. I don't think you should leave. If you are planning to move here, continue with your plans. I am just saying that building optionality into your plans is not overreacting. This isn't fear. It is awareness of reality. So if you just watch this because you're anxious, I get it. You might have heard my wife and daughter in the background, despite my best editing efforts. I have a lot at stake here. I have a lot at risk. And so I am thinking very clear-eyed about all of this. If this helps you with your long-term planning and strategic thinking about your situation, good. That's really my goal for making this video today. And if you're already here and wondering how this affects you in your own personal situation, don't forget that we created a free tool, a Move to France GPT, that is linked here in the video description, and you can find a little video walkthrough of how it works. It's totally free. We don't get anything from it. It's our gift to you in the community. And see if that helps you with some of your planning and thinking as you look ahead, given all the givens as of this moment in 2026. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this affects you directly or you're just watching out of curiosity. And if you would like a deeper dive video on any of these 5 pillars or anything else related, also let me know that too. Thanks again for watching.